Manchester United currently possess the best unbeaten run in the Premier League. United have become a much harder team to face and certainly a harder team to beat, which is quite impressive considering where we were just 12 months ago. However, I don't think everything is perfect. I do think the defence in particular could do with some work. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying the United defence is horrendous or the pitch is massively open when United are looking to defend, but I do think at times we can be a little bit too passive. I think at times we can be a little bit too easy to play against. And the big problem with this is it just gives the opposition that opportunity to gain a little bit of control in the game, and if things get worse, actually start to carry a threat in the game. Because let's say United might be dominating the ball, we might be knocking the ball about, trying to knock on the door of the opposition, and what you really want to do is sustain attacks. You want waves and waves and waves of pressure. However, if you can't defend, you can't achieve that. Because let's say, for example, you have a shot from distance, it goes behind for a goal kick. If the opposition are able to build up from their goal kick, move through the pitch and gain territory, well then you have literally lost territory and you've lost possession, but also you've potentially exposed yourself as well. Especially if you are trying to press and the opposition still find a way through, then you've got a problem because you've got players high up the pitch and now they're out of position and the opposition can move forward. Now again, I don't think it's a huge problem at Manchester United, but there is something which isn't quite working. Now, one of the problems for me is quite a simple one, and that is the fact that Manchester United often defend and press with a +1 on the backline, on the Manchester United backline. So what does that actually mean? Well, it means, let's say the opposition are playing out from the back with their centre-backs and the full-backs and the midfielders. United will push players high, we will push players into forward positions, but actually all the time over here, we will try and keep one spare. So if the opposition have one centre forward, we'll have two centre backs. Or if the opposition were to have two forwards, then we would have three players dropping into that position. We always want to try and have one extra player on the back line. And the reason why you want to do that is so that if the opposition were to go long, for example, and you want to challenge that first header, you can have someone just sweeping up behind to make sure that things don't go wrong, which makes a lot of sense. However, at the top of the pitch, there is a bit more of a problem, because if you've got +1 over here, it means you've got -1 over here, and the opposition have the goalkeeper. So for these United players, there's a lot of yards that United need to cover. Now, what we've been trying to do is sort of compress the pitch to make the pitch a little bit smaller and force the opposition to play one way. We've been trying to force the opposition to one side of the pitch, and then what we try and do is sort of lock on over in this direction. The problem is a lot of the time in this first phase we've simply been outnumbered. Now, I think this situation here against West Ham is actually a pretty good example of this because you can see the diamond. You've got Kobbie Mainoo sort of at the tip of the United diamond, and then you've got Amad and Bruno Fernandes to two forwards. And initially there's not too much of a problem here. West Ham have two centre-backs, one midfielder, so we are sort of matched up and the diamond shape feels like it can work. And we saw this earlier against Manchester City, that United could use this pressing shape to some effect. The problem is when the opposition midfielders are more open to moving and roaming into different positions. When the opposition are static, I think our press is fine. But when the opposition are a bit more free with their movement, they're a bit more open, a bit more rotational, then I think United have some problems. For example here, Fernandes, the West Ham Fernandes, drops a little bit deeper and he drags Kobbie Mainoo with him. So Kobbie is drawn into this higher position. At the same time, another West Ham midfielder is now dropping a little bit deeper. And of course, the problem that that is going to cause is quite obvious, because we are pressing with one midfielder and we are about to see two midfielders now in the picture. For Kobbie, you know, you can't really win here. You've got two players that you're trying to deal with. And Amad and Cunha here can't really help, because Amad here is sort of dealing should the pass go that way. And then if we mark Cunha over here, he is actually the one responsible for getting pressure on the ball. So for Kobbie in midfield, he's got two players. And if these two players are willing to be free with their movement, one drops towards the ball, one runs away from the ball, well then the opposition can get out from the back a little bit too easily. This isn't a Kobbie Mainoo criticism, this is simply a problem of the opposition having more players being fluid with their movement and causing problems for United. Now, that is a real problem for Manchester United because it sort of undoes all of the work that we are trying to do. We are no longer controlling where the ball is going when we are defending. It's clear what United want to do. We've seen it from day one under Michael Carrick. We want to force the opposition to one side of the pitch. The reason being because you can then make it a smaller match, basically. You can almost remove some of the opposition players from the game. But when we get outnumbered in midfield, and let's say Kobe gets drawn wide, and then this midfielder drops in and picks the ball up. If a player in midfield for the opposition is able to stop and get their head up, well then we haven't locked them to one side of the pitch, because this midfielder could now play wide to the right hand side, or he might keep the ball on this side, but the point is he's now got options, which as a defensive team is the last thing that Manchester United want. The other problem in terms of locking the players one side of the pitch is just a couple of the profiles in the Manchester United team. Now, I think United have been fantastic over the past few weeks. I think we've done a very good job defensively. I think individually we've defended very well, and I think some of our experienced players have been important. Lisandro Martinez has had some big moments, as has Harry Maguire and also Casemiro. But if we look at them as individuals, as profiles, they're not always amazing players for pressing over here. Casemiro doesn't have the greatest ground coverage, and against a midfielder or a winger perhaps, who's got the agility to twist and turn and dribble, well then you start to question Casemiro. And let's say the opposition were to play a centre forward that drops deep into these spaces over here. Is Harry Maguire really the man that you want to go with them? I'm not sure he is. And if you do get turned in these situations and the opposition can just spin out here, well then once again we haven't locked to one side and the pitch really opens up now. Now I'm going to go back 1 week to talk about this, because during our coverage of the Spurs game I did say I enjoyed large parts of the performance, but defensively there was something I was concerned about. And this was one of the problems. United's high press became a little bit passive and a little bit too easy to play against. So you can see here, Xavi Simons for Spurs. He starts in a much higher position and then drops deeper into midfield, and Diogo Dalot is going to follow him. Xavi Simons picks the ball up and knocks the ball backwards. Initially we don't have too much of a problem, but you can see there is a big space in that United midfield which Simons has gone into, and Dalot has been drawn out into it. Now the problem for Diogo Dalot is he doesn't really actually want to be there. Here he's sort of done the pressing job, but as soon as possible he wants to go back home. He's a right back. He wants to drop deeper. He doesn't want to be pressing high in a 10 position, which is understandable. So as Diogo Dalot now drops deeper, he drops off back towards right back. Xavi Simons makes a movement the other way. He drops into midfield, away from Diogo Dalot and towards Casemiro. And now this is a bit of a mismatch. Casemiro doesn't have the agility to deal with these sorts of situations. Certainly not repeatedly over 90 minutes. It doesn't suit him. And that's a problem, because you can play the ball into Xavi Simons, he can turn around and get his head up, and United have no longer locked the pitch to one side. Now Spurs have lots of options on the ball, and this is where United become just a little bit easy to play against. We'll see it again here against Spurs. United's aim is clear. Cunha curves his run. He tries to force Spurs one way towards Van de Ven. Spurs do that initially, they play this way. The problem is there's some confusion for Manchester United. I think Ahmad and Dalot can be drawn about a little bit. Sometimes Dalot can be pulled higher up the pitch, whilst Ahmad is forced a little bit deeper. And that sort of confuses things for United. Our players aren't so sure where they're supposed to go, and it opens up a gap in midfield. A gap which Van de Ven exploits and Solanke drops into. And this is Harry Maguire against Solanke. And the problem is Solanke's just a little bit too agile. Harry Maguire isn't made for defending these situations. Now, this isn't a criticism. I think he's been fantastic recently, but this doesn't really suit him. There are moments where he can be turned here. You can also imagine if this was a smaller false 9 profile, someone even more diminutive, it could be a real problem. But Solanke causes enough of a problem himself. And again, now you can see the problem. United have not locked to one side of the pitch. Now Spurs have the option to make decisions on the ball. Now, you know what? Let's do one more option. Let's go a week further back to the game against Fulham, just to sort of prove that these problems have been there for a few weeks, as we've alluded to. And just over time, it becomes a bit more of a problem. So you can see United in the diamond pressing structure, and Fulham are able to move the ball out from the back. And the way that they do that is with that straight ball, again, towards the middle of the pitch, coming from wider and then back inside, slightly diagonal. And again, we're looking at Harry Maguire here, and he just can't go with Jimenez. Jimenez is a bit too quick, a bit too sharp. Maguire doesn't quite get there. And again, this is now where options open up, because the ball is played around the corner. And as Smith Rowe picks the ball up, yes, the play has still come down the left like we wanted, but he certainly has options. He could move the ball to the player wider, or if he wanted to, he's got so much time that he could stop, he could get his head up and play to the far side. So again, United have sort of failed in their pressing shape. Now, having said all of that, I actually think the United players have done an incredible job of recovering. I think the work rate has been absolutely immense. Even when the press is played through initially, United don't seem to fall apart and collapse like we've seen in the past. The team still stays together. We still end up relatively compact. All our players are able to work hard, get behind the ball, and they sort of support each other very well. I think our forwards, midfielders and the defence have been excellent for that. So the players deserve a lot of credit. Their work rate is sort of making up for some of the issues in the structure. But it is still a problem, because in every game, the opposition can just take a moment to get their foot on the ball. They can take a moment to play out from the back and build an attack. And we saw against West Ham, a team who are deemed one of the poorer teams in the league, the quality is still there, and they only need one moment, and they can hurt you, and they can punish you. So what United need to try and do is prevent these moments where we're too easy to play against, where you can pull players up the pitch, sort of stretch United, but then also play through the spaces as well. Get the United players high and then find the gaps in midfield. That's been a bit of a problem. The question is solutions. Now, one solution for United is to change the profiles in the squad, to recognise that certain players aren't suited to a high pressing game and might get caught on the turn, and try and go for someone different. For example, you might take Harry Maguire out, which would seem harsh with his recent form, but you might bring Lenny Yoro in. You would just think if that ball's going into midfield, the player's picking it up. You would just imagine that Lenny Yoro has the better agility, the better turning speed, and also the long legs still, to sort of reach and make those challenges, to help United force one side. If this player can't turn, then we can still lock the team to one side of the pitch. So that's one thing that you could do. The other thing that you could do, let's bring Harry Maguire back in, or it could still be Yoro, is go one higher with the press. Commit one extra body just that little bit further forward to make up the numbers so we can't be played around in the first phase. So let's say the fullback's got the ball over here. Rather than a 4-4-2 diamond like this, is there a world where you can push into more of a flatter 4-4-2 and tell Casemiro to go and help Mainu in these higher positions? So the roles are still fairly obvious, right? Ahmad goes to the fullback, the front two go to the centre-backs, the midfielders pick up in here, the far winger would pick up, the fullbacks do the same, and then maybe one of your centre-backs squeezes a little bit higher. He just steps those extra few yards, maybe you do it the other way around, Lisandro Martinez. You just step an extra few yards, so United now aren't outnumbered in the first phase. We saw earlier, United were 3 versus 4 here, which was a problem, but now it's a 4 versus 4, so you would feel that United have got more chance. So again, that's a solution that we could look to in the coming weeks. It's a more aggressive style, perhaps higher risk, higher reward, because if this shape is now broken, making the recovery runs is even more difficult than ever. So perhaps the other solution that United could look to, which doesn't necessarily help with the control aspect, but it does help with the threat aspect, and that is just to sit off a little bit deeper. If Michael Carrick doesn't feel that he's got the time to coach a well-drilled, efficient high press, then the better option is to play in a mid-block. There's nothing worse in football than trying to press but failing and getting played through, because the gaps just open up in front of the defence. So the other option is potentially to drop ourselves into more of a mid-block. Now, personally, long-term, I don't like this idea. I think United should always be more aggressive. But if you sort of have to accept the short-term shortcoming and go to that mid-block, at least it still makes us difficult to play against. At least those gaps in midfield don't now open up. The problem is, it does mean that the midfield can gain some control. So my personal preferred solution is one of the first two, either changing a profile in the defence or committing an extra player tactically to the press. But this also isn't a bad idea if Carrick doesn't feel he's got the time. So yes, again, I think it's worth pointing out that this isn't a massive crisis. United have won 4 games in the last 5 and drawn the other. United aren't in turmoil all of a sudden. There's just something there defensively that could do with a little bit of work. I think if we can fix this, it will allow United to win the ball higher, which will make us a more attacking threat. With a couple of those solutions, but also just make us a little bit more compact, a little bit tighter at the back, and stop those moments where the opposition can sort of run towards our back line. If we can do that, we can sort of hold our defensive line higher, we can sort of hold the territory higher, which again is going to make United better defensively, but also offensively, I would imagine as well. So yeah, this isn't something to panic about, it's just something that can improve. But I actually think that's a real positive. We're sitting here with 4 wins from 5, 13 points from a possible 15, and there's quite clear, obvious ways that we can improve, which is a really exciting prospect. Sort of that next step for United is quite obvious to me. It's to become a more dominant team, both on the ball and off the ball. But the fact that we can see that obvious line for progress, I think is an amazing thing when you consider our recent form. It's not long ago we were begging for 1 win a month, and the problems were still there. Right now, we're winning games and can still see room for improvement. That's absolutely fantastic. There's work for Michael Carrick and his coaches to do. I think the players need to make sure they hold the intensity in those smaller games as well. I think that is important. But yeah, there's something for United to work on here. There's something that we can get better at. And if we can do that, then this team can sort of go up to the next level, which is a really exciting prospect. So yeah, that's sort of where we find ourselves at the moment. We've now got a couple of weeks' time where we've got some time off. but for the players, it's a great time to train and to work hard, and for the coaches to instill new ideas. So I'm excited to see in 2 weeks if United defend in a different manner, if it's more aggressive, if it's more advanced, if it's different profiles, or actually we do the opposite and go more into a mid-block. I'm looking forward to seeing what happens. For now, though, it's a waiting game, so that's what we're going to do. We're going to sit patiently and wait, and also wrap the video up there. So thank you guys very much for watching this one. I hope you have enjoyed it, and as always, I'll see you in the next one.